Hi, my name is Jeff Smith, minister for the Haymarket Church of Christ. This is our adult Bible class for the 12th out of 13 lessons in the book of Genesis, the story of Genesis. This is our second lesson on Joseph part 2, Genesis chapters 42 through 45. And this lesson will present at the building on June 24th in the evening. We worked through the first 11 lessons in this series from creation through the flood and then dealing with the patriarchs, Abraham first, 3 parts, 3 lessons devoted to him. We had 1 lesson on Isaac, 2 on Jacob, and we will devote 3 to Joseph, Lord willing. This is the second of those 3. We draw your attention to the word Toledah, which is translated the generations of, seeing those as the transitions from one topic to another. And we're dealing with the last one here in this section of the book, the Toledah of Jacob, which has to do mostly with Joseph. Dealing with chapter 42, as a reminder, as we closed out chapter 41, Joseph was in Egypt and he had risen through a number of trials to become second in the country only to Pharaoh, and he is selling grain. He had interpreted the dream of God to understand that there would be 7 years of famine after 7 years of plenty. The 7 years of plenty had come and gone. They had laid up at Joseph's urging storehouses during the boon years, and now they were drawing on those storehouses, and he was selling the grain to those who had need of it as the famine was upon them. And we estimate there had already been 2 years of famine. And so that famine was widespread enough that it was affecting his family back home in Canaan. And so that's what's going on at the start of chapter 42. Jacob, back home, learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, and he said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" He said, "Behold, I've heard that there is grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt, but Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might happen to him. Thus the sons of Israel came to buy among the others who came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. The 10 brothers that were involved to some degree or another in betraying Joseph and selling him into slavery are the ones who are chosen to go down into Egypt. And Joseph's full brother, Benjamin, was kept back, and it says it was because Jacob was afraid something might happen to him. He'd already lost Joseph, the firstborn of the beloved wife of his, and he was afraid to lose the other. So he sent the other 10 brothers. In verse 6, it says that Joseph was governor over the land, and he's the one who did all the transactions. Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground, and you just get the impression that they were 10 of many folks that were coming to take advantage of the storehouses of Egypt and buy grain to get through the famine. Joseph, of course, has been gone from his family for a long time and has adopted the ways of the Egyptians, and so they couldn't even imagine that he would be the one that they would be bowing before. And this is in fulfillment, if you recall, of the dreams that he had had about them so many years ago. They bow before him, and he recognizes them, but they do not recognize him. And we're going to find out later that, of course, he still understood them when they spoke, as they spoke through an interpreter. They figured that he would only catch what the interpreter translated for him, but in fact, he was catching everything that they said. So he recognizes them in verse 7, but he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. So there was no disclosure at this point that he is their brother, rather rough treatment. Where do you come from? And they say, well, we come from the land of Canaan to buy food. And he remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of them, and here is the fulfillment of that. But he accuses them of mischief. He says, "You're spies. You've come to see the nakedness of the land." And they denied it. They said, "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We're all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies." He said to them, "No, it's the nakedness of the land that you've come to see. And they said, "We, your servants, are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. Behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is no more." And of course, that's a reference to Joseph. But Joseph said to them, "It is as I said to you, you are spies. By this you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you and let him bring your brother while you remain confined, that your words may be tested, whether there is truth in you. Or else, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." And he put them all together in custody for 3 days. So you can see here that Joseph desires to see his full brother, the brother that had no part in selling him into slavery. And so that's what he arranges for. He said, "Somebody, one of you, go back and bring the other brother here." And he just throws him into the cell to let him cool off for a few days. On the 3rd day, verse 18, Joseph said to them, "Do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers remain confined where you are in custody. Let the rest go and carry grain for the famine of your households, and bring your youngest brother to me. So your words will be verified, and you shall not die." And so instead of sending one back and keeping the rest, he says, "I'll keep one and send the rest back." And so he's changed his mind on this, and that will allow them to carry the grain back where they're going. And they did so. And they said to one another, "In truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us." And Reuben answered them, "Did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you did not listen. So now there comes a reckoning for his blood." And this is where it tells us that they didn't understand that Joseph understood every word, even though the interpreter wasn't interpreting, because they were speaking his language. He turned away from them and wept, and he returned to them and spoke to them. He took Simeon from among them and bound him before their eyes. And Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to replace every man's money in his sack, to give them provisions for the journey. And this was done for them. And so they're off on their way back home, 10-1. Simeon is the hostage that is held, so that so that Joseph can try to see if they're going to be able to prove their story, or if in fact they are spies. He's going to hold on to Simeon until they bring the youngest brother, Benjamin, to him. So there's some things that Joseph learns by listening to his brothers that he might not have known before, and some things that we learn too. We learn, because it doesn't tell us in the account of him being sold into slavery, that Joseph begged them, and he was in distress, of course, as he was being sold into slavery. He begged them not to do this, and they did not listen to him. So we see Joseph's state of mind, that we suspected that he was deeply troubled by what they were doing to him. But we learn that now in what the brothers relate according to this. We see that Joseph learned a number of things by this interaction with his brethren. He knows they're alive now, and he knows his father is alive because of what they have told him. He knows how they look. He knows that they believe that Joseph is dead. He knows that Benjamin remained at home. He knows they felt guilty for what they had done to him. And he learns that Reuben had told the brothers not to sin against Joseph by selling him into slavery. So he picks up all this knowledge from listening to them in this situation. But he does something really unusual. He they load their donkeys with the grain, and find on their way home that Joseph had not only given them the grain that they had purchased, but he'd given them back the money that they paid for it. The purchase price was in every man's sack. And so when they opened their sacks to avail themselves of some of the grain, they're startled to find that everybody's money was in their sack. And they wondered what this meant. They should have left that money there, but they had it with them. They retell all of this to their father when they get home. And of course, they have to explain why Simeon is not with them. And they recount the whole story to him, and how that they brought home the grain and the money. And Jacob, in verse 36, their father said to them, "You've bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon now is no more. And you want to take Benjamin also? All this has come against me," he said. And Reuben said to his father, "Kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands," he means Benjamin, "and I will bring him back to you." But he said, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is the only one left," from the wife, of course, that he loved, Rachel. "If harm should happen to him on the journey that you're about to make, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol." So even though they have the ability to take Benjamin back and free up Simeon, Jacob won't let him go at this point. And so let's move on to some questions. So why didn't Israel send Benjamin along on the first trip to buy grain? Well, it's the same reason he didn't send Benjamin back immediately as they requested. And both times he's concerned that something's going to happen to him. Could the brothers go to Egypt and buy grain without him? Absolutely not. They're going to explain that was prerequisite. They had to bring Benjamin back. Now, was Joseph totally mean to his brothers, or totally nice, or something in between? Joseph was conflicted in this. It seems to me that he was mean, treating them like strangers in verse 7. He imprisons them for no reason for 3 days in verse 17, and then winds up keeping Simeon as hostage, binds him and keeps him as hostage, verse 24. Yet he returns their money to them with the grain that he gave them, sold them, and that he provides provisions for their journey. And I don't believe that was anything that went with a normal purchase. So he's been nice to them in some accounts, but then mean to them as well. So he seems conflicted. Well, the famine was strong in the land, and it had a long way to go, and it finds the folks in Canaan, in Jacob's house, hungry again. And so he told them, "You need to go buy us some more food." But Judah reminds him, "The man solemnly warned us, you shall not see my face unless your brother's with you." And so they've got to take Benjamin back in order for there to be any hope of their buying grain in Egypt. And so this bothers Jacob, and he's worried and doesn't want to let him go. But Judah now speaks up and says, "Send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. I will be a pledge of his safety. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. If we had not delayed, we would now have returned twice." He said that the kind of, a challenge to the father. We should have done this a long time ago. He should have let him go. Well, then finally Israel, or Jacob, relents in verse 11. "If it must be so, then do this." And he puts together a nice gift to take down to the man. We could see that this is typical of him. He gives gifts in hoping to, what you might call, curry favor. And he says, "Take double the money back and return the money that you found in your sacks, and do that, and maybe God will give you mercy before the man. And if he keeps Benjamin, then I'm bereaved. I guess there's no other choice. So they did all of that. In verse 15, they went down and they stood before Joseph. Of course, this time around, second time they're meeting, Joseph recognizes them again. But now he sees Benjamin, his full brother, that hadn't done him any evil. And he decides to have the meeting with them in his house. Bring the men into the house and slaughter an animal and make ready, for the men are to dine with me at noon. The man did as Joseph told him and brought them to Joseph's house, verse 17. And the men were afraid that they were in the house. Is it because of the money which was replaced in our sacks? Trying to figure out why they're getting this treatment. And they speak to him about the money and tell him the story. And he said, don't be afraid, in verse 23. It must be your God, and the God of your father has put treasure in your sacks for you, because I received your money. I got payment. Of course, that's a lie, but they've got to be confused. Simeon is then brought out in verse 23, and they go into the house, and they're washed, and they're ready to prepare. They're preparing themselves for the meal, and they put the present that Jacob has sent with them before Joseph. And so when he comes into the house, they bring the present and they bow down again, the second time in fulfillment of that dream to him. In verse 26, he inquired about their welfare. Is that father you spoke of well? And they said, yes, he's still alive. And they keep bowing, and he lifts up his eyes and he sees Benjamin in verse 29. And he asks, is this your youngest brother of whom you spoke? And they said yes. And it's overwhelming for him to see that. And so they struggle. I should say that Joseph struggles with this, and he finally is overcome by emotion. He has to go somewhere else. He doesn't want to weep in front of them, but he goes and he weeps, and he gets himself in order. He washes his face and comes back, and he says, all right, let's eat, serve the food. And they didn't eat together because Egyptians and Hebrews didn't eat together because the Egyptians didn't like that. And it's interesting to them that Joseph arranges them in birth order. How in the world could he know that? But he arranges them in birth order, and he puts 5 times as much food in front of Benjamin, which is very, very unusual. So after this very amiable lunch and time that they had together, it seems like everything's set. They load up the man's sacks with food as much as they can carry. They put the money back in the sacks as he did before, but he also takes one of his important cups, I guess, a very important cup, chalice or whatever, and he sticks that into Benjamin's sack, unbeknownst to them, and then lets them go away. And so they did. And they go just a little ways on their, what they think is just going to be a uncomplicated journey home. Everybody's headed home. And Joseph sends his men to catch them and to challenge them and ask them why they have done this thing and stolen the cup from him. And of course they assure him that they hadn't done it. And they hadn't done it. They hadn't physically taken it. It had been planted on them. But they agree to let them go through the luggage of each man, the sacks of each man, and have each man answer. Whoever, if anybody took it, they have to answer for it. And sure enough, they find it in Benjamin's sack. Now, this is the worst of all scenarios, because he was the one that Israel was most afraid of losing. And now they're going to lose him. He's going to be charged with stealing from this Egyptian, taken back, and they'll never see him again. And you can understand why Joseph would want to get his full brother that had never done anything wrong to him, apart from the rest of the crew that hadn't cared about him. And so that's his plan. But when they haul Benjamin back, all of them go back and return to the city. They don't just let Benjamin be taken back. In verse 14, when Judah and his brothers come into the house, he was still there. They fell before him to the ground. And Joseph keeps up with this accusation. What have you done? Do you not know that a man like me can indeed practice divination? I'll figure this stuff out that you're doing. So it's at this point that Judah speaks up. Judah was the one who promised he would bring Benjamin back, and now that he can't bring Benjamin back, he goes to work on this Egyptian who he does not know is his brother. And it's a wonderful oration. Read it in its entirety, verses 16 through 34. But in a very formal way, he asks to be able to give an explanation, and he recounts their interaction and all the things that they have said, and how much in the story he tells how much his father loves this younger one, and that if we don't bring him home, he's going to die. And Joseph would, if he kept Benjamin, serve himself, but his father then would be absolutely devastated if he doesn't if they don't bring Benjamin home. And so Judah offers up himself in verses 33 and 34. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy, as a servant to my Lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy's not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father. And so a very noble gesture here. Judah offers to exchange himself for the boy. Let the boy go free, but keep me, and I'll be your slave, because he's promised to do this thing. Very noble thing that Judah is volunteering to do. Well, Judah's plea really digs in and catches traction with Joseph. It gets to him. And he couldn't control himself anymore. He's so overcome with emotion. And so he says, make everyone go out from me. And so all the Egyptians left, and he was alone with his brothers, and he made himself known to them. And he wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed as to his presence. They just couldn't believe that the brother they thought they had, killed, effectively sold into slavery, was alive and was this man who was number 2 in Egypt. And here's where we get the 2-year part in verse 6. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years. There are yet 5 years in which there not be any plowing or harvest. And he sees through this, though, in verse 7. Joseph says, God sent me before you to preserve you for a remnant on earth, to keep you alive for you many survivors. To keep alive for you many survivors. If Joseph had not risen to this place and had this effect, his whole family in Canaan might have starved. And then where would the promise of God be if this branch through whom the Messiah was to come is destroyed in a famine? And so he sees the purpose of God in all of this. And he sees that, they had sold him into slavery. He said, but God was behind it all. And he says he's made him a father to Pharaoh in verse 8, implying, I think, that Joseph is older than Pharaoh. And he says he bids his brethren to go back and get their father and bring him down so they can dwell, in verse 10, in the land of Goshen. And you'll be near me, you and your children, and your children's children, your flocks, your herds, all that you have. And I'll provide for you, because there are yet 5 years of famine to come. And so come down here and I'll protect you, he says. And we close out chapter 45 with the brothers going home with many gifts, having been richly blessed, taking the food back to their father, but then getting back to Canaan and assuring Jacob that Joseph is still alive in verse 26. And he didn't believe them. It was just too fantastic to believe. But in verse 27, as they go on and they reassure him and tell him that Joseph has bid him come down to Egypt, he agrees in verse 28. It's enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. So we close chapter 45 with Jacob agreeing to go down to Egypt. That's the end of this lesson. We're continuing. The second of three parts in the story of Joseph will conclude, Lord willing, next time. And I hope you can join us for that. God bless.